The United States has, with immediate effect, canceled the parole program, and all parolees in the United States are required to have returned to their home countries or to have at least left the United States by April 24th, at which point they will be forcibly detained and or deported. Exact details of what will happen if they're not out by the stated date is yet unclear. Many things about the parole program have been unclear for many months now, and as someone who lives in Nicaragua and knows many parolees, some very closely, in the United States, we've been keeping close tabs on them and asking them what's going on, and their answers are consistently, we have no idea, no one has notified us of anything, we are only knowing as much as we're seeing in the news, and they're getting less news than we are often getting here in Nicaragua. So we've been actually giving them news from on the ground here, far ahead of what they're receiving as information inside the United States. This is making the entire process very scary and uncertain and difficult. So real quickly, we want to explain a few things that are going on here. First, what is the parole program? So first of all, it is not a parole. The official name of the program is parole. In no way is it a parole. So this was a psychological trick, mostly on the American people, but it is also being used, we know this on the ground, against the countries from which people have left. The term parole in the English language implies that someone has been a criminal and is now hopefully reformed, but is in a period of time where we trust that they can be allowed into public, but we need to verify, and we're giving them some time to prove themselves. That is what the term means, but this is not what this program is in any way, shape, or form, but it is used as a very effective tactic to take people who are completely 100% legal in the United States under a normal expat program and refer to them in such a way that in the minds of the American people or any English speaker, it will be assumed that this is because they were somehow illegal in some way. Most people, I think, are going to jump to the assumption that they were illegal immigrants coming into the United States and that were caught but moved into this program. The word basically guarantees that people have to jump to that or a similar conclusion, or that they are otherwise criminals in some way that are being given some amount of clemency. Now, this is really powerful as a psychological trick to English speakers to make people view anyone on parole as much like they were illegal, even though that is exactly what they are not. It also makes any country that they are returning to basically be told that something is wrong and that they were criminals in the country that they came from. So this is a very powerful thing. Words do matter. Semantics do matter. And this is a case where a false term has been applied to a title so that it can officially be used, and you can then argue, well, we didn't actually put them in a parole. We just put them in a thing called parole. And, right, you can call, McDonald's could release a thing of French fries and call it stolen French fries, and that's its name. And just because you have it, if the police say, oh, are those your French fries? And you'd say, yes, they're stolen French fries. It sounds like they should arrest you. But if they went to McDonald's and said, you accused them, they say, no, we didn't. It's the name of the product. Right? So that's it's a psychological trick. It allows for creating problems, but also for disavowing that it's just a name. Okay, so that's the first step. So this parole program allows for legal movement into the United States, a legal migration, into an expat program, which we'll talk about in a second. But this is a fully legal program designed for those who want temporary work in the United States, or maybe they desire more, but it is an immediate approval for 2 years of work eligibility in the United States. It comes with some additional things, such as needing sponsorship and more from some people who are already on the ground to help make sure that whoever's on the parole program does not become a burden or an unnecessary burden on the United States should they not be able to find a job and support themselves. But most are able to do so as there is a shortage of workers in the United States, so this pretty much works as a system. So a lot, nearly, I think 1.5 million or something, people from specifically the countries eligible for parole, Nicaragua, Venezuela, Cuba, and Haiti, came to the United States over a number of years. This has been a very popular program for several years now, and it really changed how border access was done. It really changed the flow of illegals into the United States by giving a reasonable legal path for many people to come, and so it did a lot to reduce the number of illegals coming into the United States. So we would definitely consider If there's anything to shut down the parole program, it is because they want to have a move from legal immigration or legal processing through immigration to illegal sneaking into the country, which, of course, illegals are less expensive as workers, and the United States is going through a cost crunch. So they're going to want to naturally move from higher cost legal workers to lower cost illegal workers. And so we're seeing that in a very predictable way. Right? We absolutely knew this was going to be the way that things are going. They're moving away from tight border controls and moving more towards talk of enforcement, but not real enforcement. They're looking to encourage more people sneaking in when it comes to jobs, or at least shifting from legal to illegal. But obviously that is what everyone expected. No one should be surprised by that, and it shouldn't need to really be stated. But so that is what's going on there. So this parole program was allowing for 2 years, and some people, especially those from Venezuela, Haiti, and Cuba, would then be given options to apply for further programs that could allow them to stay working in the United States for longer durations, and some of them could move into immigration programs. Immigration meaning looking for permanent stays, which could be permanent residency, it could be citizenship, or a number of other things. But immigration is a permanent status, and the parole program would potentially allow some of its candidates to apply for something that could lead towards permanence. So parole does not bar you from becoming an immigrant, but it itself is not an immigration program. It is on its own purely temporary, 2 years. There used to be the ability to extend it, so some people get 3 or 4 years. It's not really relevant, but there was extensions in the past. The extensions went away several months ago. We reported on that, but now the program has been canceled completely. There's been stages. First, they canceled extensions, then they canceled new applicants to the program. Now they are kicking out the people who have already gone through the program, been approved, and moved into the United States during the middle of their duration, are now being told they have to leave. So this is importantly an expat program. Expat programs are when you have, for example, tourist visas or other temporary situational visas, right? Digital nomad visas would be another example, temporary work visas, tourist visas, short-term residency visas. All of these things are not immigration. They are not tools for immigration in and of themselves. In almost all cases, in almost all countries, those types of things can be used as a stepping stone to use being an expat or an expat status, and then one, decide if immigration is something you want, and I'll give an example of that in a second, and two, maybe move towards immigration. In most countries, the United States included, and Nicaragua included, being an expat temporarily is a really normal and kind of expected part of the process before considering, deciding on, and going after immigration, should that be something that you decide that you want. There are countries, few and far between, but there are absolutely countries who would not consider that an appropriate process, and they expect you to apply for a permanent immigration status before you would ever consider, or instead of ever considering, a temporary status. And so that does happen. There are countries that if you go and stay there long-term, say as a digital nomad, that it'll make it more difficult or potentially even bar you from permanent immigration, whereas if you'd applied for immigration immediately, it may have been granted to you. So definitely rare, and almost always only a temporary problem, very rare for it to completely bar you, but these things do exist. In this case, this is a purely expat program. There's no part of the parole program on its own that leads to an immigration status. So because it's temporary, it is for expats. And I know a lot of people get very incensed because they've been trained by the United States to use these terms completely inappropriately and often backwards for harm, just like using parole is a psychological trick. People use terms such as illegal immigrants or legal immigrants to refer to anyone who is visiting the country. That is not what the English word immigrant means, and so it is a misuse. And in the United States, it has been and is completely understood. There's no one who's going to be surprised by this, and if you pretend you are, no, don't say it. You're not allowed. We're going to say right now, you're not allowed to complain about this on the channel. If you don't understand the English, absolutely we understand. Americans have been drilled to do this not just incorrectly, but in a harmful way. We totally understand. To our American, especially audience, to some Canadians get it too, because they get a lot of media from the United States. But we are not going to lie about what these terms are just to make people who've been misusing them or mishearing them or whose family uses them incorrectly feel better. We're not going to do that. It is, and I'm going to be very clear about this, using the term immigrant when you're referring to an expat. Yes, we understand. We will use it accidentally because we've been trained to do so much. So yes, be merciful on people that you need to give them some leeway, that they may be trying to use the terms correctly and slip. Absolutely. But if you try to argue that you should use racist terminology and misuse the words for the purpose of causing harm, Absolutely no. You're not allowed to say that on the channel. If you have questions as to why these words are this way, search on this channel for expat, immigrant, and there is a video that breaks down the English words and explains exactly what they mean. But the high-level view is simply this. All people who live outside of their home country are expats. Period. End of story. There is no, if you try to include some special designation, oh, it's only white people, oh, it's only rich people, oh, you are lying. That is not what the word means. It has never been what the word means. There are a group of people who wish to do harm to many people and try to imply that this term, for some reason, I don't even know why this works this way, but they want to imply that this term is an elitist term, but it is not. All of these people who are in the United States from somewhere else, who are no longer in their home country, doesn't matter where they go, if you have left your home country, you are an expat. Period. End of story. We understand there can be some allowance for like, well, I left for the weekend to go to Cabo. Oh, we don't normally call you an expat while you're on vacation, but technically you kind of are for those 2 days. It would be silly to use the term. Clearly, you're just a vacationer, but it is a gray area as to how long before we stop calling it vacation and when we start calling it an expat. The two kind of overlap. And historically, people would go in Europe and do the grand tour of Europe for 6 months, 2 years, and they would generally not call themselves expats. They would just call themselves tourists. But over time, we've made the amount of time we consider to be a reasonable tourist shorter and shorter, especially for Americans. Something that's like more than 2 weeks. That's crazy. Who would do that? But it used to be from England. People would go for 2 years and think nothing of it. So our ideas have started to change the language a little bit, but that's not really relevant here. So anyone who is out of their home country is an expat. For programs like Parole, it is only for expats. If you're a Nicaraguan on parole, there is no path from that towards any permanency. So they are purely expats 100%. They're intending to be expats. If you are from one of the 3 other countries, Haiti, Cuba, or Venezuela, and you're in the parole program, there is some possibility, some reasonable possibility that you may be in the parole program with the intent of trying to apply for a further stay that will turn into permanence in the future within a different program. That doesn't make the parole program itself an immigration program, but it could mean that it is part of your process in becoming an immigrant. But we have to assume that that is not what people were intending to do, and now we definitely know that that is not what is going to happen. So that is a big change. So this is a program for expats, but some people use expat programs to try to become immigrants, but not the Nicaraguans with this particular program. Those are just important clarities to have. So there is immigration involved potentially with the process, but it is only possible, not the process itself. Now, what's going to happen to the slightly more than 500,000 parolees who are in the United States as of this date and need to get out? Well, this is going to be a mass migration out of the United States, and a couple different things are likely to happen. Of course, we don't have any great answers. One is many of them are going to attempt to move back home, but that is roughly 125,000 people returning to each country. Cuba is certainly not prepared to take an influx of that kind of number of people. Venezuela could do so without too much of a problem because it is a large country. Of course, we don't know how much go to each country. Nicaragua will struggle very hard because it is we're in a housing crisis, we're in an employment crisis, as is much of the region. So we will be very hard for us here. And of course, Haiti, it is unthinkable that those people will be sent back into a literal war zone, or it is not safe at all, and it is likely to trigger large-scale massacres. Like, we are truly terrified for what will happen in Haiti. Here in Nicaragua, people will be safe returning. They just are coming back to a lot of poverty that will be exacerbated by the return process. So that's one possibility, is that those people are going to primarily return to their home countries. But many people are going to be seeking alternatives and some things that need to be considered right now. One is that Mexico does need a lot of workers. Mexico is in an economic boom and could really use a lot of low-cost workers. So there's a possibility that Mexico will absorb a number of them, especially those coming from Nicaragua, because it used to be part of Mexico. And so there's a certain affinity politically for the two countries to work together, the two cultures to work together. Even the name Nicaragua refers to the fact that it was long-term, for 1,000 years or more, part of Mexico, the Mexican hinterland. But Cuba and Venezuela, they're much more farther afield. It's going to be much more difficult to get that kind of affinity into a local country. But we could see Mexico taking quite a few people. Mexico is such a large country that it really could absorb that number of people, especially Spanish speakers, far more easily than most countries in the entire Western Hemisphere. Other places that may take a lot of these, we'll call them parolee refugees from the parole program. One is hopefully Canada will be able to absorb a large number. I know that Canada does have programs in place specifically to help people in these types of positions to get out of the United States and be fully legal in Canada, at least temporarily. Again, expat programs, not immigration programs, but Canada is a little bit softer on long-term immigration. Still very hard, but a little bit softer than the United States. So some of those people who were hoping for American immigration may be able to look for Canadian immigration. Not that if you can't get the US, you automatically want Canada, but a lot of people obviously would. Also, Spain generally works very hard to absorb a large number of migrant workers and people in this kind of emergency state from its former colonies, all of which these countries are except for Haiti. And so the Spanish-speaking portion of the parolee program, there's a possibility that some of them will be applying to Spain in an emergency. But everything has to be done within 30 days. So this is a very fast program. Of course, there's countries around the world who'd be willing to take them, but in small numbers. This is a very large number of people who need to migrate extremely quickly. And so I'm sure we will see to some degree a kind of spreading throughout the region as people from this program go to whatever country they're able to get into, wherever they have connections. A lot of people in these programs do have family members. For example, it would be very normal for someone from Nicaragua to have family members who live in Costa Rica or Honduras. They may return to those countries where they have family and maybe a job opportunity that they were able to line up, but a very large number will be returning to their home countries. And of course, there is the problem that the parole program was designated to create these false designations and make people look unattractive to their original countries. There is the possibility that some of these countries will refuse some or a large number of the people returning. Of course, some are guaranteed to be taken back. But because the program did have a requirement, as we understand it, as we've been told by people on the program, there was a requirement to renounce their home country as part of the parole program towards the end. And if they are in that program, it tells their home countries that they were willing to do that, or at least willing to say that they were willing to do that when they started the program, even if they had not done it yet. And that provides a very strong legal structure for all of these countries to decide not to allow them to return, forcing them into some kind of emergency or illegal status within the United States. So it was a very risky program for people to enter into. It was presented from the United States as a very welcoming, very safe, very this is your future kind of program, and people just bought into it and went in droves, and then many returned very disenchanted. We've seen tons of that here over the years in Nicaragua, and now we are seeing the true dangers of this, that people may not have the flexibility to continue their lives as they want, not just in the US, but they may not have the power to return in some cases because of some of the very, very nefarious aspects of how the program was structured. So there's a lot of fear around this. So we don't know what's going to be happening over the next month, but it's going to be an interesting month for sure, and not in a positive way, as we see how this plays out within the region, where people decide to go, what numbers move where, and how it impacts those countries. Of course, all those countries will have some benefit from additional workers, and it will lower the overall cost of employment, most likely in those countries. There is opportunities for many of those parolees, for example, coming back here to Nicaragua, which is where I know best, that many of them have been exposed to a lot more English than they would have had otherwise. And whether you have a few months or almost 2 years of English direct training in the United States, that's going to give you both culturally and historically and linguistically a major advantage for working here in Nicaragua, because the one thing we are short of here is English-speaking workers, and especially English-speaking workers with any affinity for American business practices or workspace practices. This is something that much of Latin America struggles with trying to work remotely with companies in the United States, is that they really don't have a framework for understanding what an American office environment is like. Those who have been on parole have at least a little bit more exposure to that, and it could benefit them. If they've managed to learn English and learn it well during that time, they will come back to almost unlimited numbers of jobs. Right now, because they have not yet come back, there are loads of jobs open. Of course, they will fill them very quickly as they return, because these are big numbers. but that is a potential boom for the country to have those people living in the country instead of out of the country with good jobs here and able to work remotely, filling things that have been lacking in the past. So we should be seeing opportunities for new types of office environments to spring up here to service what is potentially a pretty good pool of incoming new workers that have not been here for the last few years. So there's a lot to see change, but this is a major impact to the United States. There are tons of industries that are losing their workforces. There are tons of wonderful human beings who are 100% legal, who've done everything right, who are being completely thrown by the wayside and left into a panic situation without clarity. And we're going to see what plays out over the next month. We hope the best for everyone. If you know anyone who is in distress and needs assistance, check our communications channels on the forum here, and we will do our best to get people into contact with whoever we can to get them help. We have very limited resources. There are very limited resources out there, but communications is key, and it needs to be fast. People are under the gun to get out of the country in 4 weeks. Even things like flights. I don't know if there are enough flights going out of the country to this region to carry all of those people. So we have no idea how they are logistically going to be able to get out of the country in that amount of time. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel and the work that we do here, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Alan Miller. And as always, like, subscribe, share on social media, tell a friend about the show, watch another video. If you want to join our community, we have a join button down there. We have a WhatsApp group where you can talk to expats who are living here in Nicaragua or interested in Nicaragua and so forth. And I will see all of you tomorrow.